Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph and I lead the DevRel team here at AppSmith. And today we're going to build an image resizing and compression utility using the dropzone JavaScript library. Now, AppSmith already has a file picker widget that will let you upload an image and send it to any API or database. There's also a file size limit setting so that you can limit which files the user is able to upload. And then you can set that to match whatever the limits are for your database or API. But what if the user has an image larger than that limit and they really need to upload it? Now, you could let each user find their own solution for compressing or resizing images, but that would lead to inconsistent results and just frustrated users. So today we're going to build a tool that allows them to do that compression and resizing in the browser before they send it off to that API. So they can start with an image of any size and still compress it to within the limits of the API or database that you're using. So let's get started. We'll first check out the finished app, walk through how it works, and then we'll jump into building it from scratch. All right, let's check it out. Okay, here's a quick preview of what we're going to build today. I'm using the dropzone JavaScript library to create this area where the user can drag in a file or click to upload. So I'm going to drag in an image here using the banner for this blog post. I've got a tutorial version of this as well. And so this shows your initial file name, dimensions, and the file size. And then you can compress it and resize independently. So if I only compress it to 0.9 here, then you can see that I'm getting back an image of the same dimensions, but the file size is smaller. Or you can keep it the exact same compression quality and just scale the image. So I could take this down to 50%, and then you can see that the resulting image here is half that width, but it's not losing any of the image quality. And you don't really see a difference on the compression until you get really low. If I go down to 5% here, you can see it gets pretty grainy. But this will give the user some feedback so that they can try different values, get within whatever that file size limit is, and then they can make sure they don't over compress or over scale the image. So if you want to minimize the loss there and the compression, but get within a certain file size, you can just tweak it a little bit, test it again, and you get that feedback. So you know what your resulting file size is before you download it. And then the user could download this back to their device, and that could be the extent of the tool, or it could be a step they do before uploading it to an API or database to make sure it fits within the limits for that system. So this is what we're going to build. I'm using dropzone to capture the file inside the custom widget instead of using a file picker widget outside of the custom widget. I tried that first, but I had to pass the full file into the custom widget. And so that's writing to the custom widget model. And then inside the custom widget, I was doing the compression and scaling, and then sending that compressed version back out of the custom widget. And I found that to be a little slow, a little buggy, because I was storing two versions of the file, and the first one is way bigger before it's compressed. So by capturing the file inside the custom widget, I'm only storing it once after it's been compressed. And that's the only version that gets written to the custom widget model. So don't necessarily need to use dropzone for the image compression and the scaling. That has nothing to do with dropzone. But since I needed to capture that file inside the custom widget for performance, I tried a few different options, and this one was really easy to implement. It looks great out of the box, and I've got it tied into the AppSmith theme. So if I change the app theme, all of this purple here will change with it. And the border radius and stuff like that, it's all tied to the theme. So this is what we're going to build. We're going to start out by just getting a very basic version of dropzone working. And once we have that and we can see the file size, then we'll work on the image compression and scaling. And I've got all of this in a tutorial on the community portal, so you can follow along and copy the code from here and go step by step to see how it's built, or you can just copy the finished app and get the final version without going through all the steps. So first thing we're going to do is start out with a new page here. Go to edit mode, And we're going to rebuild this from scratch. So I will start a new page. And let's drag in a custom widget. All right, and then we want to go edit the source for this custom widget. And first thing I'm going to do is just clear out the default code here that comes with it. And just ignore this AI tab here for now. That is a new feature coming out soon. You'll be hearing a lot more about it soon, but today we're just going to be doing this from scratch, the old-fashioned way, coding it ourselves. But there is something really cool coming here soon in this AI tab. So, all right, I got those three cleared out. Now let's go back to the tutorial here. So on the HTML side, for this custom widget, you don't need a full HTML document. You only need what's needed for that UI component. And for this most basic example, we just need a div that has an ID or a class that we can target. And so I'm going to paste this in to the HTML side and then go to the JavaScript here. And so in order to import the library and then initialize dropzone, we'll just paste this in the JavaScript side here and then go over it. So I'm importing the ESM version, and this gets the dependencies with it. There's two things you'd have to import if you do it on the HTML side, one for the JavaScript and one for the CSS, and then you want to wait until the app has loaded and imported that stuff to avoid any errors when it first starts up. I've got it set up using the ESM version. I am waiting for AppSmith to be ready, the onReady function, and then initializing dropzone. And so you can see I've got my console log here that AppSmith is ready. And then the console gets logged and there's no errors. So it's importing the library and initializing dropzone. This part's really simple. You just have a function that gets called to initialize dropzone. And that is just creating a new instance of it, new dropzone, where the first parameter is the target. So here I'm targeting it by the ID, getting the element that has a ID of dropzone. So that's the one div that we have here. And then it takes an object for the second parameter. And this is all of the different config options that you'll find in the dropzone docs. We'll check that out here in a minute. So with this example, I don't want to send the file anywhere. You can set it up so that as soon as you select a file, it would instantly upload it. And here you can specify where that is. We're not going to use that or the auto process because what we're eventually going to build here, I only have the upload button so far, but I want to have an input for the user to select the scale and the compression. And they can adjust those things and then choose to do something with the file. So we're not trying to upload it the instant that the user adds a file. And I've got the auto process here set to false for that, accepting only image files and only one file. And so it's still able to preview it. You can see dropzone is doing its own little preview and the file size and the name. So I haven't added any of that stuff, but we are going to do something similar with just a little more detail, like I showed in the intro, where we're going to show the input file size and dimensions, and then the resulting compressed file size and dimensions. So that's the basics to get this working. Let's check out the docs. So this is the library we're using, and they've got a cool interactive demo of it here on the website. You can drag a file to this target area or click to upload a file. So we'll check out the docs here. And this is an open source project, by the way. It's a really cool library that makes it easy to capture the files, especially with drag and drop, and it just looks great out of the box. They've put a lot of work into making it look good without having to tweak everything. So let's see how the setup works here. So you can either use declarative or imperative methods for setting this up and creating that instance. Declarative is definitely a little simpler if you don't need to do anything complex. So this is the easiest way to set it up, but it's also a little limited as far as how you can customize it. So what this does is just goes through your doc when once the library is loaded, it'll find all of the form elements that has the class dropzone. So just by having this here on a form and then importing the library, that's going to turn it into a target drop area. So you could drag in a file. So really easy to get it working out of the box that way. But you are a little limited on what you can do with binding functions and custom triggers and events and whatnot. So we're going to look at the imperative method. And so for this, you have to declare it. You say new drop zone to create the instance. You give it the first parameter here for the ID, and then this config object for everything else. And that's where you can put all these extra things to define it, other than just giving it a class. So when you do this, you're going to be creating the instance of it here in this function, and then all of the extra config goes here. And so we can check out the config section. Now, here where this config starts, they're initializing it here and setting dropzone.options. So there's a couple different ways to pass in those extra values for the setup. You can either do it with as you're initializing it and make it that second parameter, or after you've initialized it and then do the dot options and then set some value there. So we're using the events, and I want to have an event when a file gets added. So this is the first example that they have here. It's the name, whatever you've named that instance. So here we're calling it my drop zone, and then we create the element. And now that it's created, it has all of these methods. And one of them is the on method, on some event. And here you put the name of that event. So we're trying to add a function to the on file added event. So back to the code here. Now that we've got that much working, what I want to do is set something up so that as I drag in a file, it's going to update the UI and put those extra data points on there, showing the file size, the input dimensions and the file size, and then we'll do the same thing with the output. So I'm going to copy this section and we will check it out in the HTML tab here. Now this is giving us a input for the scale factor, an input for the quality, and then we've got two buttons, one to compress it and one to clear and remove the file, and then the original button that we had. So just a couple extra inputs and buttons, nothing too complex here yet. And then back here to the tutorial, we've got some CSS that'll make this look a little better. I'm sure somebody out there can do way better than me, but I got some basics at least so that it looks a little more like the rest of the app. Could probably do a lot more to the text here, but it's a start. So, all right, so it looks better now. You can drag in a file. Now to update the JS side here. There's a lot to this, and so I kind of explain it in individual pieces here. Some of it's screenshots, some of it's the actual code. I'm going to skip to grabbing this final version of it, and then we'll just walk through how it works here in the editor so I can kind of expand and collapse the sections. All right. So it's still just an onReady function calling the drop zone init. That part hasn't changed. And then what happens inside the drop zone init, that's not much different than what we had a minute ago. The one thing I've added is when drop zone initializes, I want it to run a function. And that function that's getting ran is binding another function, which is handle added file. So it's a little confusing because of the use of this. You want to make sure that you define this function using the original method. Don't use an arrow function here because that changes the way this works. And we need the this keyword to apply to drop zone. If you use an arrow function, the this keyword will apply to the arrow function, to that new context. And the original, older format of a function here, this inherits this from the parent, from the environment here. And so when drop zone gets initialized, this outer function binds a new function called handle added file. It's binding it to this. This is drop zone. Okay, it's a little confusing, but it's basically taking my own custom function and putting it at that global context of drop zone of that instance. So we're going to skip past what the two buttons here do. There's the compress image button and clear file. So focusing just on what's changed here. We're still importing it. We got the on ready, and then we initialize drop zone. The one change here is that when a file gets added, I want to run that function, which is going to just update the UI and show the file size. So if I drag in a file here, you can see that it has added these 3 lines, and it'll do that for each image as one is added. That's the trigger when a file gets added. So that function then, handle file added. First thing is it's just removing if there's an existing file, because I want to keep that at only one file in there. Then, in order to do anything with that file that's been uploaded, I need it in a file reader. So create a new file reader. Once that file reader is loaded, then it has an event. So let's kind of collapse this here. You can see that as that event happens, it's going to create an image. So first you have to load the data itself into a file reader. Now that you have it in a file reader, you can take that data and create an actual image out of it. Then I'm taking this input image, setting its source to the event target result, which is the data that came from that file. All of this just gets the input image into to an actual image object so that I can detect the height and the width. I can't do that when it's just a file in a file reader. It has to be an image in an image object to have those properties of an input width and height. So I'm just detecting the input width and height and then writing those values back to the document here. So it's not changing anything yet, but I did have to load the image into a file reader and then into a image. So that's the extent of this function. You can see the other end of it here. When a file gets added to the target area, when you drag in a file or select it with the button. All right, so that's that function. We skip past what happens when you click to compress it. So just a couple of checks first. Make sure there's a file. If not, alert and return. Make sure there's a valid scale factor. If not, alert and return on that. And then figuring out what the compression quality is. Again, just checking the inputs. So that stuff's pretty self-explanatory there. Then once we've done those checks, again, we're setting up a new file reader, a new image to load in the result. And then once the image is loaded, here I'm drawing the image on the canvas and taking that scale factor against the width and the height. So before it gets drawn on the canvas, it's going to be scaled to begin with as it's created. The scaling part is happening here, but not the compression. So we create a new image on the document using the canvas here. It is scaled as it's created. Then I'm creating the compressed version as a data URL. So that is using the second parameter here of the to data URL method, which works on those base64 strings. And I want to compress it to a certain quality. That's coming from the input, which is defined above. So it's this variable here, quality, is coming from that input, from your compression quality here. And so this compresses it and then writes the same type of data to the UI here. So when I click compress, if I get this out of the way, you can see we've got the new dimensions down here. And so this one is keeping the same dimensions because I've got the scale factor at 100. If we put this at, we'll try 70 and compress again. And so you see now we're reducing both numbers here. So you can kind of mix those depending on what you want. If you want to keep the image the exact same size, but the file size is too big, then you would only do compression or vice versa. If you wanted to actually make the image smaller but not lose quality, then you could keep this at 1, but then scale it down. So that is everything that happens when you click the compress button. That's the majority of the logic there and the JavaScript involved with this. And the last button then to clear it that we skipped over here. This one just has an event listener for the clear file button, and it tells dropzone to remove all the files that have been uploaded. So I can click clear file here and it resets that element. I'm also updating the AppSmith model to remove that compressed image. I think I might have skipped over that line here, but in this first function for the compress, it's writing that data URL out of the custom widget so we can use it. And then I'm just resetting those two divs where I'm displaying the different numbers. So not much to the clear file button. Let's go back here. I missed pointing out where we write it to the model. Here it is. So it gets compressed, and then that string, which is a data URL, gets written back to the model. Let's watch that actually happen here. So you can see the custom widget model. It actually still has that tips array because as I first built this, I did not change the model here. So I'm going to clear all this out. And instead, we will put an object. And I'm going to give this a compressed URL property with an empty string for now. I think I had compressed on the other side there. Let's double check. So we're going to save it to a value called compressed image. That's it. All right. So this is just a placeholder when the custom widget first loads up. There won't be any real data that we're passing in, but I'm putting a placeholder here for where I'm going to pass out the data URL. Now I'll drag in another image here. And so you can see that nothing has changed in the model yet. The only thing that's happened is we load the image into a file reader and then into a image so that I can get these dimensions and write it on the screen. Then when we compress it, watch over here on the model. So it's writing the data URL and putting that back in the model so we can access it outside of the custom widget. And so back to the main app here, I'm going to add a new widget here below. And I tried to do this with an image widget, but the image widget is made for displaying images so that they look good. And so it's going to auto size to something. All of the different options for how to adjust it, they're like, do you want to expand like a cover image or a banner or auto size? But I couldn't make it just do real size, like the exact size without any scaling at all. But the iframe, this will display the data URL exactly as it is. So right here, I'm just going to reference custom one, go to its model, and then get that compressed image. And as soon as I drag an image in here and compress it, so we will compress that. And then here you can see that it's not scaling it. It won't fit within here because it's too big. But if I make this, say 30%, we can see it got a little smaller now. It fits within the frame. So the iframe widget will display that data URL exactly as it is. There's nothing else going on in this iframe to tell it to auto size, but the image widget was trying to be helpful and make it look good, and it had to resize to something, whether it's resizing to the width and maybe cropping the height, or do you want it to fit auto? So this will let you see the resulting image, and you can access it here in the custom model so that you can send this value then to any API or database. Now, depending on where you send it, you may have to split this by a comma here. You can look for the comma and then take the first index, so not the zero index, because that would be the first half, right? The zero-based array, taking that first index then would be the second half. So you would want to split this and send only the base64 string itself, depending on where you're sending it. Some things will accept it like this and use this to help create the right type of file. Others, they just get the base64 string itself and they're gonna detect it or go off the file name. So it really depends on what service or API you're sending it to, but this will give you access to it. You could also split this and grab that base64 string and then use JavaScript to convert it back to binary. So there's the A to B and B to A methods in JavaScript that'll convert back and forth there. So this should give you everything you need to give the user those tools so they can adjust files before upload. They won't have to leave the app and go find some other tool to compress or resize their image to fit within the limits of your system, your API or database that you're using. So that's everything I wanted to show for this week. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions on this one, feel free to drop a comment below. So thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.